Hi again. Welcome back to Griffith Realty's Land and Legacy podcast. I'm Scott Griffith, president of Griffith Realty, and I'm here with my sister Carol Griffith, and vice president of Griffith Realty. And this podcast, we really like to focus on why we're so passionate about why home ownership is so important to the absolute underpinnings of the economy in Livingston County. We are obviously products of living here our whole life, but we have invested in the community. We have our homes here in this community, and we know the value of why home ownership matters. With that, I thought maybe Carol could start to talk a little bit about some of the things we're going to go through, kind of the different important aspects of home ownership and why it should matter to you. And again, we're always open to questions and or your thoughts. So if you ever, as you listen to our podcast, if it ever strikes you, you want to go to our website and look up Griffith Realty or call us and have a conversation with us, we're always open to that discussion. So Carol, what are your thoughts?
It's kind of interesting right now because almost, I think, in my case, every customer I work with watches HGTV or List It or Sell It, and so I think one could become very accustomed to thinking that purchasing real estate or a home is just emotionally charged. It's about the color on the walls or the latest cabinetry or the light fixtures, but really we've been in it so long that we understand and we promote that real estate actually helps one accumulate wealth.
Yes.
So besides this emotional element that everybody feels when they fall in love with their house, there's deeper attributes to real estate. And when we say, accumulating wealth is important, we've found that there's a distinct difference between that person that rents and that has home ownership. I think you know what the statistics are.
I mean, so the National Association of Realtors has published for years, and it's remarkable actually that the typical net worth of a renter is only $6,000, and it doesn't vary, but by maybe $1,000 through recessions or whatever. Yet the net worth of a family who owns a home is multiplied by nearly 6 times to 10 times, and sometimes even greater when the economy is actually booming. And, when you think about it, Carol, I mean, you're told all your life, diversify your investments. I don't think anybody would argue that you shouldn't take your liquid cash and find ways to diversify it, but you also, real estate gives you one more underpinning of diversification to keeps, and what better than something you can live in, your home.
Exactly. And, the other thing that is such a value to a community, and we've seen this in Livingston County, a great majority of our people do own houses, but they bring stabilization to a community. So, for instance, statistics, again, have shown that for those that have home ownership, they have a sense of belonging. And we find that the schools tend to be a little bit better, too, because it's not as transient. People aren't moving their children in and out. We find that those are the individuals, too, that own homes that really give back to a community. And we live in such a benevolent community here in Livingston County. I know both of us have sat on the United Way boards, and we've both have contributed to Gleaners and the Salvation Army and so many other great nonprofits in Livingston County that I have been astounded that when the residents that just give back to this community and volunteer. It doesn't even have to be monetarily. They volunteer their time.
They take more than just ownership of their home. They take ownership of the community, and that's why they give back. I mean, that's what you see is it's more than just the structure. It's the community that they've bought into. We were touching there for a moment about wealth building, and what makes home ownership the most remarkable investment and such an amazing part of our country is the fact it's a leveraged buy. You can buy a multi tens of thousands, $100,000 homes, and do it with only 5% down, 3% down in some cases.
Yes.
And the leveraging on that type of thing. So if your home goes up at only 3% a year, the multiplier effect on money is so phenomenal. It gives you the liquidity to be able to do those things that help you then build the foster the community, like make your donations to your churches and your charities and so forth, because you have this great leveraged investment on your hands. So
Good point.
it really does matter. It also leads to the creation of family, whether it's multi-generational, the ability to be near parents and siblings, or even the creation of family in the sense of first-time home buyers, newly married, have the ability to raise their children and therefore have great schools because you invest then in your schools. You're willing to pay the taxes to have great schools. We have a great to be able to use your tax money from tax to create a better environment for your children,
Well, and I think sometimes we forget the long-term economic growth it creates too.
Yeah.
So for every house that someone purchases, 3 times or more goes back into the gross domestic product. So I think the statistics are over a period of time, approximately $65,000 to $70,000 is reinvested for every $200,000 sale. So you and I have seen this many times. We sell a house to someone who came from a 2-car garage and they buy a house with a 3rd-car garage. Well, pretty soon then they bought the 3rd car. Maybe it's for recreation, maybe it's for a student that they have at home, but those are the things that contribute to the gross domestic product.
Well, if you move from a 1,500 square foot house to a 3,000 square foot house, you're going to need the furnishings to go with it, and you're going to have all those other things that go with it.
And you paint and you recarpet, and maybe you put a fence or a pool in the backyard, and so the economic benefit is sometimes gets overlooked, I think, because we just know those things will happen.
Interestingly, there was a study done, and it's now probably, I bet you it's 15, maybe 20 years old, but it made a lot of people in the marketing world jump up and pay attention. They studied and determined that for the 6 months prior to your purchase to the 12 months after your purchase, you spent 50% of the value of the home matching your investment, your improvement in lifestyle to the investment of the house. So as you say, the 3-car garage, all of a sudden you have a new car. The more square footage, you got to have more furnishings. You
move to a lake and you buy a boat.
You buy a boat. So it's a fascinating, relationship to the entire economy. It's just not your quality of life improving, but the entire economy benefits from the purchase. And so that's great. Economic growth is huge. It makes our downtowns vibrant, right. To be able to, and it feeds on it. So then when people come to our downtown, they love the downtown, and now they want to live here, It's just a fascinating circle of life that we create with home ownership and ownership of property,
And we couldn't be more fortunate, you and I, to have lived in a generational type of business where we see this just flourish. And we see people who move in that are truly excited and happy, and they made their best move. They moved here to Livingston County, and for all the reasons we love Livingston County,
right.
They learned to love Livingston County for the same way. So it's really it's such a satisfaction, a personal satisfaction to see
and
this.
so it's sort of funny because we're talking about why it's so important, yet it must be so intuitive, because when you think about it, so like our grandfather who had, was there 11 kids in his family? I forget.
11 children.
11 kids. They all bought homes. No, I don't think anybody had to have this little conversation we're having for them to understand the benefits of having a home that they call their own, home ownership. I think we become so worldly. We do see it in a bigger schedule. I thought it was particularly fascinating listening to a group of researchers talk yesterday on National Association of Realtors, and they had one researcher who has projected, who does a study every year of whether you should rent or own, and the conversation went something to the effect of, when they said, well, are you saying then there's times that you should absolutely rent? He says, there is, except for, he explained it in his family, he's probably similar age to me in his 60s. He and his wife saying, well, wouldn't this be a good time for us to rent? Well, then they agree there's nowhere to go, and so he's decided not to sell his home and not rent. So I find it fascinating that somebody who is probably a leading advocate of renting over ownership wasn't even willing to give up ownership because they could see that he seemed to be
so many benefits.
Yeah, he seemed to be more interested in, if you're just starting out, I guess you make that judgment call. Mm-hmm. But I think having roots and a place to call your home is crucial to your security and safety. I think you tend to have a more safe environment when you have that type of situation too.
Absolutely. You know, when you have more stable neighborhoods, basically. Yeah. You know, you don't have transient people coming and going, and you get to know your neighbors a little bit more, and all of that just feeds for a quality of life that you can find here in Livingston County that I think is awesome.
Yeah, I completely agree. So, Carol, you've studied this a little bit more than I have. So who are some of the most likely investors in homes in this community, do you see?
Well, you know, things change over time, obviously. And so right now in the last couple of years, we've seen the millennials. They've made up the largest part of our market because they, as we have talked about before, they get married and or, you know, find peace and satisfaction in a really busy city. So, for example, maybe they have their first job in downtown Detroit and they live in one of those really cool high-rises and flats and so forth. And then all of a sudden they decide they're going to get the dog. And all of a sudden then they decide, to go out, we got to walk the dog or take the dog to a dog park and so forth. And then the next step might be children, and they want to make sure, of course, that they've got good daycare and so forth. So all of a sudden we see them kind of gravitate back to an opportunity that we have here in Livingston County that is ease for commuting, and we have good schools and we have major recreation right in the backyard. And so there's an attraction there. We also see with the aging population that you know, some of the people that have moved and raised a big family in a larger home, all of a sudden when they become empty nesters, they're ready for a change there because they don't necessarily need all the bedrooms, and they understand that the children scatter around and they might not be back for every holiday and every birthday and so forth. So they come to us looking for a transition, which would be a ranch home or maybe even a house that just has a master on the entry level, thinking that they are going to age in place. So we are seeing those on both spectrums. You know, that seems to be the most activity.
Right.
And then, you know, we've got some older folks that are, you know, kind of sunsetters. In other words, they're on a retirement income and they really need more assistance in their living. So if they can't really age in place like they really like to, then we see them going to some of the retirement homes.
I think it's interesting anecdotally. I mean, the late boomers, because I represent a late boomer. I guess we both do, because when you're in your 60s, you're a late boomer.
Well, don't tell anybody our age.
We're all the ones who are driving the movement to still own, but move down, but it needs to be on one floor. And yet, as a entry-level buyer, you like ranch homes too. So you see so much demand for the one-story house. It's so competitive, and if you look at a price per square foot, how much higher the price per square foot is for a ranch-style home than a two-story. Not that they're not desirable, and two-stories just don't drive a market too. It's just they're geared
different
more
clientele.
toward a healthier market and maybe somebody looking for a bigger house. You know, it's easier to stack a house or two boxes on top of each other to get a more efficient house.
And yet, you know, in a way, it's almost a compliment. I mean, these people that want to downsize, they want to stay in the area.
They want to stay.
They want to stay here, and so they're just looking for maybe more efficiency in their living.
But I think it also leads to the recognition again that ownership's more important. I mean, these are people who could easily say, "I'll live in my RV," or "I'm going to rent when I visit back to the place that I was," and instead they want to keep an investment here. You know, you could quit paying taxes if you don't own, but no, they want to own the property. Yeah. They see the stability of the investment, you know. And I think that's key. I mean, there's no doubt about it.
I don't think that, that characteristic, if you will, or has changed over the years either. I mean, we've kind of reached that stage in our life of selling where now it's kind of fun because we have actually sold the third generation their house.
Multi-generational selling has become very, very fun.
Yeah, and it is just great fun.
Yes.
That we can now see how those family formations have taken place, and we kind of reminisce on when we met the grandparents, if you will, and so I think that stability, even in the business world, is important to them, as that stability to live in Livingston County is important, and what we see in that too.
Yeah, so. I think at the end of the day, clearly, as you and I have now reminisced on, it's pretty clear that home ownership is probably a key foundational element of both our community and probably the whole nation, and it's so important. I know that the statistic is that we dropped to a level of only 60% home ownership across the country during the end of the recession, to now we're back up to a statistic that's closer, I believe, to 63 or 64%, which doesn't sound like a huge jump, but on a average before the last recession, it only reached like 67. So we're getting well close to that.
Right.
And one of the things that people underestimate is when you talk about the state of Michigan, as Carol and I know from working with the Michigan Association of Realtors, other than Minnesota, Michigan has the second highest level of home ownership rate of any state in the country. It goes back to our industrial roots, because when everybody worked for industry, they could afford to buy a house, but it doesn't change. We all still love them, and so it also coincidentally in the state of Michigan, we have the second largest number of second home ownership of any other than Florida in the country, but that's because we have such wonderful lakes and so much recreation in our state.
And we have a lot of waterfront.
We have a lot of water.
And so that makes Michigan highly desirable, too.
Yeah.
And it's nice to see that this is all bounced back. I mean, we do go through cycles, and I know during the last recession, we felt just so it was tough to listen and to look at some of the homeowners and what they were going through, and some really bad foreclosures, which sometimes wasn't driven by their own doings. But I know that during the height of the recession, I think Livingston County had somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,022 foreclosures. If you remember the notices that have to be published by law in the newspaper, that's what made up the newspaper.
Right,
it's really sad to see. And, I'm happy to report that up to now, we're just starting the fourth quarter, of course, of the year, there's only been 19. And so that really shows that we've bounced back, and also that COVID has not disrupted the housing market as we knew it, and we were concerned that we would revert back to what we saw during the recession, and that didn't
And when you
happen.
see the lack of supply we've had, it also goes to the point that if you have to get out of a house for economic reasons, you sure can. You just got to get it on the market.
Get it
so
on the market,
it's a fast.
right.
So
that's an interesting statistic.
That shows the stability of housing again. So
it will run in cycles and everything, but we always end up on top, and that's the good news.
Yeah. So I think at the end of the day, there's no doubt. We're probably singing to the choir when we tell people this, but home ownership is the key foundational element of both our county, our communities, and probably our nation in making you have the pride. So
it needs to be a priority because of that.
Yes. So with that, thank you very much for listening today. We appreciate your attention to our conversations. I hope that you too think home ownership matters, and we thank you again.